Hello friends, welcome back! Look how far we've come, we're ready to start painting our scenes. So we're doing all of our underpainting with watercolor and I'm starting with a wash. I've got my round brush, it's a watercolor brush, it holds lots of water. You've heard me say all of this before, I'm just saying it again in case it helps you hear it again. I'm essentially just painting with water right now. I'm going around all of the elements that I sketched, so I'm just making the paper wet in all of the areas that will essentially be a night sky behind this little scene. So my plan is to paint it all with this blue, and it's going to get painted over again with gouache, and again, and it's going to get darker and darker, but the underpainting serves a few purposes. First of all, if there's any color shining through when we're done with the painting, it'll be this color now and not paper color. It's also going to help me begin to see exactly what goes where with just a little bit of light pigment that's easy to blot up like I just did if something goes sideways. I'm trying to keep the night sky kind of out of the range of these stars, these little glowing bulbs that I intend to have shining here in the background, since I decided to give us all sorts of light sources coming from every direction. It's fine. It's gonna be great. And I mean, honestly, I probably could have just started this part straight up with gouache, and I could have started really dark. And you know, with gouache, you're supposed to do fat over lean. So you start with a thinner wash, kind of like this. You do have to start thinner. Gouache is just much more opaque, so it probably would have been a lot darker from the jump. But regardless, either way, the way that you do this is it's a buildup. So this is just laying the foundation of that buildup. So I'm narrating what I'm doing because I don't want it to sound like I'm bossing you around. But I have been like, follow me. So I guess I would say at this point what I'm doing and what you could be doing is I'm looking at my sketch and I'm just making sure that I'm putting some blue down to show me, to make it really clear where the teacups are and where the mushrooms are and where it stops and where's the blue supposed to go. It starts to make it really clear where the night sky ends and where the different elements of the sketch begin. Need more water. Oh no, too much water. Trying to just separate the antlers from the ears here and see if I can make that easier to see for when I keep going forward. I'm gonna add more pigment, and you might notice that it does pretty okay at keeping a separation between, oh, gotta take some of it away. But anyways, it does a pretty good job. The dry paper doesn't get pigmented because it's dry. So you can see a line, like a demarcation line there under the dragon's chin where I just placed some pigment because the dragon's dry and the paper's wet. More pigment, more water, more pigment. I just keep going back and forth, and you'll see me check my brush. I'm checking it right now. Oh, I didn't hold it up close enough. Sorry. Maybe I did. Let's find out. Oh, there we go. I barely see it anyway. Okay, but I'm checking to see how much pigment is on my brush before I touch it to the paper. I do that all the time. You'll see me blotting my brush on, you'll see me blotting it on paper towels. You'll see me blotting it on the palette. You'll see me blot my brush on my hand just to be like, how much pigment, how much water before I touch it to the page. And then of course I'll make adjustments based on that. I might get more pigment, I might rinse some out, I might just blot it off directly onto the paper towel just to get it off as just the right amount off of my brush before I move on to the paper. So that's the kind of thing that you learn and get kind of a sense for as you practice. You'll start to develop an understanding of what it how like how much how much pigment is left on the brush when you blot some of it off, whether you need more. And then you'll see me sometimes blot it or not blot it and just throw it on the page anyway, and then I'm like, oh no, it's way too much pigment, and then I'll go back over it with water and whatever you have to do. It's kind of like a little paint dance. You know, one step forward, two steps back, you just keep going. In case you're wondering what's going on here, my vision was kind of that they're in a tree, but you can see the night sky behind them, and it's such a big tree that you've got, I don't know, maybe branches or roots or something is going down off the page, and it's all night sky behind it. And wow, okay, I'm trying to make my brush a little more pointy. Oh, I was drying it all the way off so that I could sop up some of that pigment and water with it. That's something you can do if you feel like you have too much pigment and water going on. Did it again right there. It's so funny to me watching this back now because I know that later I'm going to paint over it with such dark, opaque paint that it's so silly that I'm just, I don't know, stressing for some reason about a little bit of color there, but that's okay. You don't know until you know. I put a little bit of yellow pigment on my brush, which you can barely even see, and so I decided to just do a wash over this entire thing and not even try to avoid the different elements in this sketch, because you're just going to be able to see all of them anyways. It doesn't even matter. You're seeing me make some decisions here because you can see where I started to just paint the moon yellow, and then I decided to just go for it and do the whole circle. At the time that I was painting this, I thought I'll make it glowy and it will be as if this whole circle is glowing. Like it's a really radiant moon and there's stars in there and everything. And I thought that the background, the light purple background that we've got there, even though it's such a light purple, I was looking at it in contrast to this extremely pale yellow, and I thought that was going to be enough to get the glowing effect that we need, but you'll see much later I'll decide that it's not enough, and I'm going to pull in the same dark blue of the sky behind the dragon's tree and all of that. I'm going to pull that same blue into the moon circle too, and not paint over the moon, but just paint inside of it. You'll see what I do. But it was kind of a funny other thought process there too. So I don't know. I feel like I should apologize because as I'm showing you how to do this, I'm like, do it this way and then do it that way, and then later I change it. But that's just the way I roll when I'm making art. And honestly, I think most artists do roll that way. Or let's say many. I think it's safe to say many. I don't know. I think it's pretty common and normal. But again, and I know I've talked about this before, but I do think it's so funny now when I think about the art tutorials and such that I watch, because I think it's really hard to show the process as an artist, and I don't blame many artists for not doing that. Just showing their very polished step by step without showing the parts where they made choices that they decided against later, and the backtracking and all of the back and forth and all of that. But while I think their tutorials are really helpful when it's step by step like that without showing any backtracking and such, I am realizing that, this is the part I think I've already said, I'll probably just keep saying it again and again, but I'm realizing that it's a little misleading when you watch them, because it kind of, maybe, at least it did for me, kind of trained me to believe that you're not supposed to have all of this messy middle stuff going on. You're supposed to just be able to move seamlessly from one step to another, and that's just not realistic. That's not the way art typically goes. That's the edited version. And honestly, what you're seeing here is even an edited version because there are many moments where I have stopped and sat in front of this painting with my paintbrush just hovering above the page, just thinking for minutes in a row, and nobody needed to see that. You didn't need to see how long I sat. You really didn't. But I'll just tell you that I did. So if you need to sit and just think for a while you look at your painting, that's okay. There's no rush whatsoever. I just needed this not to be a billion hours long, so that's why I cut it out. But by the way, I went and got my gouache. So I let this sit and dry for a long time. So it's all dry now. And now I'm starting on gouache on dried paper, dry paint. Here I'm trying to decide exactly what color I want to use for this tree that the dragon's sitting on. I think the impulse is to reach for brown when you're painting a tree, or green when you're painting leaves, or blue when you're painting the sky, and those are not bad impulses, but I heard some advice one time that I really liked, and that was be careful about using storybook colors, because then you're just using the most obvious choice and you might not be using the most realistic choice, because things don't always look the way the most standard version of them in our heads looks. I'm choosing blue because it's a nighttime scene, and so it wouldn't be looking brown. It would be looking probably a lot more blue in the dark, so that's why I chose blue. Again, with gouache, we want to go fat over lean, so that means we start with lean, so very diluted. That's why you saw me pick up a bunch of clean water from my cup and put it on this plastic palette that came with my palette. So many different palettes. Anyways, I put that there, and I put a little bit of pigment in it from a little bit of gouache, and you can see how opaque it is as opposed to the watercolor, even when it is that diluted. Part of what I'm doing here is the same thing I was doing earlier with the watercolor when I was explaining to you about how I blot my brush all over the place. I blot it on paper towels or any piece of plastic, palette, or whatever that's lying around my hand, any kind of surface, just to see how much water and how much pigment my brush is holding. So what I've done here is serving that purpose, but I didn't use a paper towel because I want to continue using that little splotch of painty water. Since I've got it to the exact right consistency that I want, it's handy to keep it there and keep going back to it so that I don't have to recreate that exact same dilution of water and paint every single time I want to re-up what I've got in my brush to keep on painting. Of course, now that I've said all of that, I'm going to go ahead and add more paint and more water. But that's okay, I'm just adding to my little splotch there, and I'm just gonna keep on painting this tree in a very paint by numbers fashion for a while. One more side note about not choosing colors based on your typical standard storybook colors is, while it might also not always be the most realistic choice, it might also not be the most interesting choice. Sometimes you're not aiming for realism, you're just aiming for interest, and that's okay too. I'm deciding what kind of blue to use. I'm keeping in mind that I intend to use blue for the background, the nighttime sky color. So my intention is to choose two different kinds of blues with different color temperatures. So I want one of them to be a warmer blue and one of them to be a cooler blue, meaning one of them is going to lean a little more towards red, like purplish. That would be the warm blue, and one of them will lean a little more towards yellow-green, and that would be the the cooler blue. Okay, I hope this is not a bad time to remind you guys not to overload your brushes. It's really easy to overload your brush with gouache because it's wet. It's not all, typically it's wet. Well, there's some dried on the lid there that I could reactivate with water, and if I'm doing that, it's much harder to overload my brush. It's much more like what we typically experience with watercolor when it's dry and we add water to it to reactivate it. But with gouache, it's already wet, kind of like acrylic would be wet. So you have to be careful not to dunk your brush in all the way up to the metal part of the brush. You want to be really conscious of how much paint you're putting on your brush when you go to get some paint out. You might only need to just get the tiniest dot of paint, honestly, sometimes. And then sometimes you might need more paint, so in that case, I would recommend not going up past about halfway up the bristles, probably. don't stress if your brush gets water all the way up to the metal part. That doesn't really matter. It's really just paint. You really can overload your brush with paint, and then it'll make it so it's not holding enough water, and it can get all janky, and it won't be as pointy when you need it to be, and all of the things. So do not recommend overloading the brush. Okay, again with the fat over lean, I don't know if you noticed that I was just painting with just straight water out of like, technically I should probably be getting water out of the clean cup, because we have the clean cup and the dirty cup. I forgot to mention that too, in case anyone needs a reminder, but it doesn't really matter because the dirty cup is not that dirty. you start playing a little fast and loose with all this stuff once you get the hang of it. Anyway, I'm falling behind my own video because now I'm back to just painting with paint, but earlier I just used a little bit of water because I noticed that the lean wasn't quite lean enough, so I needed to dilute it out a little bit, which you can still do directly onto the page if you need to. So that's what I was doing. I was going over my gouache paint with water to blend it out a little bit more. I'm going to show you guys this brush to let you see where the size is there, where it says 2. This little one is a size 2. The bigger one, I don't even know, I just moved it too fast. It's probably like a 12 or a 10 or something, but the point is I'm switching out to a smaller brush to make the details easier to go around. If you don't have a smaller brush, it's okay. You will just have to go very, very lightly when you want to do more details, meaning if you press down with the brush harder, it'll blunt it more and it'll be a thicker line. So if you want a thinner, more detailed line with your paint and you've got a thicker brush but it's got a good point on it because it's still a round brush, you can still get a pretty good thin line if you're touching the paper very, very lightly. And this is true for smaller brushes too. I still have to go pretty lightly when I'm doing very fine details. If you are trying to do this and the brush and the paint and everything is not behaving how you want it to and you're super frustrated, please do not be in distress because this is just one of those things that takes a lot of practice and you will get better the more you do it. That's just how it works. And in the meantime, if your lines are not looking very defined, I would like to submit for your consideration artists like Claude Monet, for example. It is okay to paint without much detail, without a ton of detail. In fact, I am often trying to work a lot of detail out of my paintings because there's nothing wrong with a lot of detail. However, it's also a different kind of skill to be able to paint in a way that is more loose and more painterly, to where the lines are not so well defined. You can kind of take a step back and squint at it and look at it as a whole again and imagine it in a different way and let it just be what it is while you're learning. I had to take a little detour to research some of those impressionists so I could find some good art for you guys to look at to see what I meant when I said looser and more painterly. And I was reading about them and the way that they all had different ways of doing their brush strokes. Some were more sketchy and some had brush strokes that were described as being feather-like. Each artist had their own way of placing paint down onto the page, and the way that they did it had an impact on the way their art was perceived by the viewer. Some of them made paintings that portrayed light as having a lot of movement, and some made paintings that were very wispy and willowy and conveyed a sense of peace. And that was down to their own way of moving a paintbrush around that they figured out over the course of just messing around with paint for a really long time. I'm out here trying to go around these little antlers, just the tedium. 1 million. Oh, that was his ear. See, I don't even know. I don't even know what I'm looking at anymore. So if you don't know what you're looking at anymore, take heart. Neither do I. Oh, also, sometimes when I'm drying my brush off, I kind of turn it as I dry it because that sort of makes the point pointy again. I don't know. That's a thing I do that I don't really think about very much. So here I am telling you. And so now that it's all dry, I'm just going back in and pushing and pulling paint around again with a brush that's just like a tiny bit damp, but like mostly dry. Need more paint, but also can definitely not take the paint straight onto the page. Gotta do some blotting and stuff first on a piece of plastic. It's mandatory. Just kidding, it's not mandatory, but I always have to do it. I need to know. I need to know exactly what my brush status is before it goes on the page. This is very wet gouache. I think probably around this point I'm realizing that there's not much more that I can do with it until this section dries. Or maybe I didn't realize it. Maybe I'm just gonna keep overworking it for no reason. Oh my gosh, Sarah, put the paintbrush down. Take a break. My goodness. It's time. It's time. Also, I know I'm always harping this too, but see what I did there in the water? I'm doing very, very fast figure eights, and that will wash your brush out so nicely. Okay, got my watercolors out while I wait for the gouache to dry. I can work on this section over here where I have these glowy stars because it's not directly touching the wet blue gouache of the tree. If it were to touch the wet blue gouache of the tree, then the gouache, of course, would bleed right into the yellow, and that would be not what I'm aiming for. So can't let it touch, can't let it touch. I was a little precarious over by the dragon side, but looks like it's okay. Little bit of glowy down here by the crow's feet. I'm gonna pull up some pigment from these stars because apparently I decided it was too much. So I gotta find a clean patch of paper towel here so that I don't go getting other colors into the stars. Again, this is so funny to watch now that I know what I have done with the painting so far, because I am going to paint over this with some pretty opaque gouache later. So, oh well, so it goes. But I would say, even though we're going to paint over it later, this is still really useful because look at how easy it is now to see where I want things to be glowy and where I want things to be darker. It's all part of building things up, so there's still a point to it. I would still suggest doing it. Just maybe don't fret about it quite as much as I did while I was working on it. Busting the gouache out again. I left it covered all that time because gouache dries so fast. So anytime I realize that I'm taking a break from the gouache, I just gotta cover it back up. Let me move my emotional support beverage out of the way, lest I wash my brush out in it. Oh, that would be so tragic. I'm gonna turn this palette over and see if I can find, woohoo, there it is. There's the paint I want to use. I'm just gonna reactivate it with some water. This is why I don't clean my palette, because all of this paint is very intentional. I might be coming back to it, who knows? Okay, let's paint the crow. We're starting with this, and it's, yeah, I guess that's the same color that I used for the tree, which is totally fine, but you'll see a lot of using the same colors throughout a painting, and that just creates a lot of harmony as long as you don't have them up so close to each other that you can't decipher your images anymore. So I realized as I was doing this that I do have a bit of a method to the madness, and I think it's mainly that I tend to start out with something that's a bit of a mid-tone. It's not the lightest lights and it's not the darkest darks. It's just a flat, somewhere in the middle, and I'm gonna again just kind of color him in, but I'm trying to do it lightly enough that I can still see the lines from my sketch. Because if I can avoid losing the lines, I would like to avoid it, because that would be really helpful. But it's okay if they get lost. I know that a lot of my students lost their crow, they lost their dragon, they lost the lines while they did this part, and that's okay. I would just advise to try to hold on to your reference photos or whatever it was that you were looking at that got you there in the first place with your sketch, so that you can look at it again and just remember where all your lines are. You just go back to the same thing that you did when you were sketching, which is you find your shapes again. You find your big shapes and then you work your way down to your little shapes again, just like you did the first time, only this time you'd be doing it with paint, and your proportions are all still there. You're not going to lose any of that. It's all okay. And if you did lose your proportions, it's okay. We're doing a little bit more of starting over from scratch. Here I'm pulling some darker values up and making them lighter just by using water. So the more that you move your light and your dark around, you're going to start to find the shapes again. And while this gouache is as wet as it is, I am once again just pushing paint around. If I want him to look like he's got more shadows in one spot, I'm just pushing more paint there. And if I want him to seem like there's more light in one area, I just remove some paint from that section, and you start to kind of be able to see him again. Alright, I'm getting the gouache out again because now I need to start mixing some colors for the dragon. And I'm probably going to put the reference photo that I used for the dragon back on the screen so that y'all can have it in case you have lost your dragon or in case you lose your dragon. I made a mistake here, by the way. I just went straight into the paint with my paintbrush. I think I'm looking at it like, oh no, I overloaded my brush. I'm going to have to wash it out now. I should not be probably using a paintbrush for mixing quite this much paint, because overloading the brush is exactly what's going to happen. And I am watching this back in pain. What did I just do to my brush? Oh, I think I was really tired and I got lazy. I didn't go get my palette knife, which is what I should have done. And now I've just made more work for myself. It's okay that the brush is overloaded, but I'm gonna have to really wash it out now because that just doesn't end well. It's not nice to the brush, Here I go to do what I should have done in the first place, gathering my palette knives. I didn't even have to get up to go get them. Good gravy. I don't know what I was thinking, but look how much easier this is. I love mixing paint with a palette knife. It's 10 out of 10, way better. This is crazy because look how black it looks. But I'm not mixing black, I'm mixing a purple. I'm actually trying to aim for kind of a maroonish, meaning more towards the red end of purple. Incidentally, I remember one of my students telling me that he wanted to paint a red dragon, and in case you want to paint a red dragon, I just want to let you know that painting a maroon dragon is painting a red dragon in this case, because a red dragon would be looking kind of maroonish at night. And if you want to show that he's red, you might have a little bit of light coming off of some of those glowy orbs landing on his scales, and then that where the light touches would be red, because that's how it would look. However, if you're not aiming for realism, disregard all of that. But like I've said before, there are no rules in art, but there is cause and effect. So this is an example of that. That is to say that, of course, there's no rule that you can't paint a dragon looking really red in the middle of the night. It's just that the effect of that will be that it won't look like the night. It'll look like something else is going on, which is totally okay if that's what you want. But if it's not what you want, you might want to be aware of the cause and effect of that. Oh, must have bumped my table because the camera's all wobbly. Sorry, everyone. So, okay, we are looking very grayish purple here, I think. And that is totally okay. I will be pulling in so many more colors as we continue to build this up as we go. So for now, I'm just doing the same thing I did with the crow, where it's pretty flat mid-tone. It's pretty light actually, and that's okay too, because I'm just building it up slowly. Right now I'm just trying to get my head around exactly where he is. Like, where is this dragon's body anyway? Apart from his wings and his antlers and everything. This is helping me get oriented in space, and so I'm going very lightly and gently with this very first undercoat layer. Also, this applies to the dragon and the crow when I'm doing these coats. When I say darker or lighter, the paper underneath them is white until I do this. It's white. And that means that I'm not adding, you saw, like I didn't mix any, I know that paint looks super black, but it's not. I didn't add any black to make it darker, not adding white to make it lighter, just adding more water. You can see where he's darker on his elbow there, the dragon. And that's where there's simply more paint and less water. And where he's lighter, there's just more water and less paint. And I can just keep moving it around. So that's helping me not lose him. But again, if you've lost him, that's okay. I'm going to do a video eventually to show you how to recover a lost dragon. Oh, and speaking of which, I will put the ferret up here in the corner again, because that was what I was looking at when we sketched the dragon to begin with. I will say that when you're looking at reference photos, when you're not sketching but you're painting, and especially if you've lost your creature, and it's okay whether you've lost your creature or not, it's really helpful to have a reference photo, because you're going to look at it very closely to see how the light touches the different parts of it, what parts are lighter, what parts are darker. And you probably weren't looking at that when you first sketched it, because why would you be? You weren't doing any of that. You were just finding your shapes, which is great. But now you're looking for a different kind of shapes. You're looking for the kind of shapes that are created by a light source and that are created by shadows. And what we end up painting is going to be a little different than that, since we've got light sources coming from all kinds of different directions and stuff. And it's okay, because you're just going to follow along and see what I do. But some of those shadows will not change. For example, if you look at that ferret, he's got a pretty hefty shadow in between like his little armpit elbow area and his little tummy. You can see how there's a shadow there, and that's not going to change, because that's just a darkness that the light's not going to be able to get in no matter what, because of the way he's sitting, or where his leg goes over his tail is another good example of that. So you can look for those inevitable shadows and let those guide you a little bit to help you not lose the creature that you're trying to make. You can look at those areas and know that they're going to be darker, there's going to be shadows falling, and that will help you retain his shape so that you don't completely lose him under all the paint. Alright, that's a wrap, and it is not a wrap at all, because look at us, right? It's not even a good stopping place. But that's okay. You can stop and let things dry, and then we'll pick it up again in the next one.